Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Ubumi Olajide and thank you for joining us again. It's been quite a bit since the last episode, but there's a very good reason for that. This particular episode we'll be speaking with Dr. Rico, and she is what I can describe as a career expert for people in the energy sector. She works with a lot of clients in the oil and gas industry that are looking to go on to other industries and to apply their skills elsewhere. A lot of the advice that Amanda gives on this doesn't just apply to people who have years and years of experience. It's very applicable to people who are still in their early careers. So a lot of the advice that she gave here in this interview, I've actually applied it to my own career and my own job search. I recently started a role at Student Energy. I'm truly excited about the opportunity, and I know that a lot of people are still trying to find their feet. COVID has really destabilized plans that we had for ourselves, but just keep going. And I think this episode in particular has many actionable advice to get you going and to get you looking in the right direction. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, the new role I have won't really change anything for the podcast. The only thing that will change is I am going to be looking for a production studio to help keep up with weekly episodes. We have not been so consistent so far, and I would very much like to get back to that. And also we're looking for a sponsor, so you will hear me pitch this sponsor thing quite a lot in future episode intros because it's something that we feel that we're ready for. The Energy Talk is now the largest energy podcast in Africa, and we feel that there's so much growth that's left, and we've mastered this unique way of telling stories that I feel is incredibly timely and important. And if you're listening to this, I hope you agree as well. So without any further ado, this has been quite a long intro. Let's get back to the episode and learn from Dr. Rico about what it's like transitioning your career and really building in the energy sector. Enjoy. What would you say is the major challenges that you've seen with the clients that you work with, especially when it comes to advising them on transitioning their careers and writing their resumes and pointing out transferable skills?
One of the first things that I always tell people who are wanting to get into renewables is that it's not a lateral move, that they can't just think, okay, I've been in oil and gas and that's in energy, therefore I can switch to renewables easily. I think that now there's a lot of concern over people trying to find jobs, and so some people are trying to shift to renewables.
I realized quickly that the energy industry was shifting majorly towards the clean energy transition space, and that's where all the growth was. And the traditional oil and gas industry wasn't doing a very good job to absorb the fresh graduates during that time. I know a lot of my colleagues that graduated around the same time period also had the same problem, and it's not just a regional issue. It's reflected pretty much everywhere there's a large oil and gas presence.
I completely agree. And I think that also is challenging, and just kind of thinking through, I guess, educating people about what renewables actually are, what types of options there are in renewables going into clean energy. Because a lot of oil and gas companies, they come up with initiatives, and some are better at it than others. But I think that what's challenging is that there's so much misinformation, so many misconceptions, and then also a bit of just kind of misunderstanding. I think between both of the industries, that's only kind of shifted as things have become increasingly more politicized. One industry is on this camp and the other one's on this camp. And I think that's created some issues as well in terms of people thinking through what it would look like to switch to a different industry or a different sector. I think that it's cool that you saw some indicators and then made a shift, kind of dove headfirst into thinking about, okay, so if this is an option or if this is the future, then what would it look like for me to kind of go forward with the clean energy option?
Definitely. And you brought up an interesting point that sometimes it's not just a career conversation. It comes down to ideology sometimes, that leaving the oil and gas industry isn't just as simple as trying to find a career option. Most of the time it becomes political, and it really goes to like the personal identity and everything. I would like to start with your background, because I think a lot of the work you're doing now has been influenced with the communities you grew up and the proximity to the oil and gas industry. Just to hear about it, and how did you first get interested in the energy space, and how did you find that kind of calling, if you will, to the work you do now?
So my road to oil and gas and energy has been interesting because I have not worked in the industry. My husband is a senior drilling engineer. So I remember being at the University of Oklahoma and starting my MA there in English, and him asking me if I could help him with a paper on diamond drill bits. I was like, what the heck is a diamond drill? That was over 12 years ago now. And I just found myself becoming increasingly interested with the energy sector and with all the different types of technology and all the different types of operational strategies that people have to come up with in order to get oil out of the ground. I found that a lot of our connections, whenever he and I got married and we moved to Houston, everybody was in oil and gas and energy. So a lot of our connections were geologists and account managers and landmen and reservoir engineers. And I had no idea what those things meant. My background was in English. It was in the humanities. I was not an engineer. And whenever I came to Houston, I was starting a doctorate in English. So at every social gathering that my husband and I would go to, everybody there would be in oil and gas. And so I guess just kind of asking questions and wanting to learn, I just started developing kind of a base knowledge of, okay, if you're a production engineer, this is what you do. Okay, so you need a background in being a reservoir engineer, but it's kind of more ops based. And I would just have conversations with people and started developing that interest. And then eventually started writing resumes for people, honestly, because I had the English background. It was a fun genre to write in. And on top of that, I was working with a lot of engineers that didn't know how to write. So they would, approach me. They'd be like, hey, Amanda, I think that this sentence is complete crap. Would you help me with this? And I'd be like, yeah, sure. And so they'd send along their resume. And initially, I had no clue how to write a resume years and years ago. I remember thinking, okay, but this is just a targeted document. That's all it is. All you're having to do is think of your audience. And the more that I got into that, and the more that I realized that people in oil and gas and energy really needed a specialized person to help them with the terminology that they use, the more that I got deeper into really enjoying writing resumes for this specific industry. A lot of the people who were in my field, I guess you'd say, in resume writing, they're more generalist. So they'll write resumes for people all across the board in any industry. I occasionally will write resumes, usually at the executive level, for people outside the industry, but I like to stick to what I know best, because that's where your strengths are. And that's where you write the best material, is if you can explain what a production engineer does for a role outside of oil and gas. And especially now with the downturn, that's really what people are needing. They need someone who can explain what it takes to drill a well in a way that somebody outside of the industry is going to understand and appreciate and see that as a transferable skill.
You have a very unique introduction to the energy sector, and I'm guessing a lot of the people you're working with come to you with the resume problems and the unique career challenges. Most of them, as you probably finding out, are looking to move away and looking for skills they can transfer on to, let's say, the tech industry or the clean energy space.
Right.
So when did you first start noticing that trend, and how is it playing out for you now, especially with the people you work with?
It's never been so intense as it is during this downturn. Things cycle now much tighter in the oil and gas industry. The cycles are getting a lot closer together. Before, it might have been 7 years. Now it's roughly 3 to 4 years, if not even less. So I will say that I have never written so many career change resumes in my entire life. This downturn, it's 75% of the people that I talk to, and I have 3 consultations a day, Monday through Friday. So 15 people a week, 75% of them, they're asking for career change focus. And that's such a bummer to me, because the industry is so fun. But I think that what ends up being the challenge is thinking through breaking it down. So what have they done? Let's say, for instance, someone's a landman and they want to shift to a role outside of the industry. Well, my first question is going to be, okay, what all did you do in land management? And what's your target? Have you done any research so far? What's your target going outside of the industry? Do you have any ideas or thoughts? And I think the challenge has been that so many people I talk to, they'll be like, no, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do outside of the industry. All I know is being landman, or all I know is being reservoir engineer. So this downturn in terms of career changing kind of helped me, I guess, think through transferable skills in a new way, because there are so many less jobs out there that we have to think very, very targeted and be very deliberate about what we're targeting and if that's even going to be a good fit. It all depends on the person and their specialization. For instance, reservoir engineers, a lot of them will shift into finance because they're really, really good at assessing if assets are going to be profitable. They're good at data analysis. If they've shifted into production, then they also have the technical piece and the ops piece. I have to assess each person differently in terms of, okay, I know what you do. If you're telling me that you're a completions engineer, okay, what's your target? So it's going through this process with each person and determining their unique skills and then what that will look like outside of the industry. I won't lie, shifting into renewables, a lot of people say that they want to do it, but there's just so little research done about the options that there are. And what I'll hear quite a bit is, well, I've done something similar in oil and gas. If someone would just give me a chance, then I can show I can do it. And unfortunately, that's just not how a job search, not an effective one, at least. That's the temperature of what's going on now in terms of people career changing and shifting specifically from oil and gas into tech, into finance, into construction, industrial manufacturing, and also into renewables. Because those are the main industries that I see people trying to shift into just based off their specialized skills.
When you look at transferable skills and you look at a CV, what are the common themes that you really notice that really makes things stand out? Because I think that's kind of tips that people want to look for. Like, how do you make yourself stand out in a large pool of applicants? Because as you mentioned, the opportunities seem to shrink every single quarter.
Yeah.
And there's still lots of people who are looking for those opportunities and trying to find a fit and prove they can do the job very well. So
right.
What common mistakes do you see and what trends do you see that people can take advantage of and just like make themselves look better and be better prepared for opportunities?
A common mistake I see is not being targeted enough. Thinking, okay, well, I have experience doing operations and being a project engineer and doing XYZ and having all of these different things that they're good at. And then the resume reflects that. So basically they look like a jack of all trades and they look like a 20% fit for 5 different jobs. Unfortunately, they're never going to get a call for any of them because a recruiter and a hiring manager is looking for someone who is just completely laser focused in on the job that they're hiring for. So I say it a lot on LinkedIn and I'll say it again, you have to target. That is the number one thing that if there can be a takeaway here, you have to target your materials to that specific job. You have to basically read the job descriptions like a blueprint. If you're an engineer, look at that. If you've ever had to write an AFE, if you've had to write a grant or something like that, everything has to be honed in on what your goal is and trying to convince that reader that you're the one that they need to call in for the interview. And that takes time. It can be really frustrating to write your materials. So targeting, I think that the second thing that I would say with that is to stop wasting time applying to a ridiculous amount of jobs. The spray and pray method, like, well, if I just send out enough resumes, someone will call me. And all that does is just frustrate you because it doesn't work. Again, you can't just send one resume out to every single job. Imagine for a moment that you are a hiring manager for Amazon and you get a resume where the first description of this candidate is drilling engineer. You have no idea what that means. No clue. So I think as a job seeker, put yourself in the shoes of that recruiter or of that hiring manager and think, does this make sense? Would this make sense to this person? Because they have no idea what you do. You have to spoon feed them. You have to give them exactly what they want to hear. Be truthful about your background. Don't just start lying. But make sure that you're putting yourself in that person's shoes. They're not going to know what a workover is or a recompletion or production or anything like that. They have no idea what any of that means. That takes a lot of work, time, money, budgeting, a lot of operational procedures and policies, safety, and all of that's encompassed in this term production, for instance. But they have no clue that all of that is involved in that one thing. So I think that targeting being the first thing, and then secondly, kind of putting yourself in the hiring manager's shoes, thinking about it from their perspective. What types of transferable skills are they asking for on that job description that you can look at and you can say, okay, they're looking for budgeting. I'm really good at budgeting. Okay, they're looking for project management. I'm a really good project manager. So looking at those job descriptions like a blueprint, picking up on things that you're good at. And sometimes something that's helpful to just keep yourself from getting overwhelmed as you're doing this process is to just get a highlighter out. Print out the job description that really interests you and just take a highlighter and just highlight all the stuff that you think you could do based off your experience. If at the end of that process you have very little highlighted, you should not apply to that job. And I don't just mean, oh, I could do that. I mean, have I done it? Just be mindful again. If you get in that interview and that hiring manager says, so it says on here that you've done XYZ, can you give me some examples? And your mindset was much more, well, I could do those things. It's going to come across bad to that hiring manager. So just make sure kind of in this job search that it's based off of proven results, proven accomplishments that you've already done. And if at the end of that process you have a ton highlighted, then consider it and then get to work on thinking through the terms that you use, if those are going to make sense to that employer.
Speaking about being overwhelmed, I'm sure a lot of the people, especially during this period, who are coming to you for consultations and who you're currently working with, they are feeling very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And most of them are dealing with a very large amount of uncertainty and they don't really know what's next. So you have to get them in a state of mind to be ready for the process, because most of the time it's a pretty long process to find a fit and to go through everything and to keep applying and to stay positive. What do you tell them in that regard? Because I'm sure a lot of people as well would also benefit from that kind of practical advice if you can give them.
Break it down into smaller stages. So a lot of people in oil and gas are excellent project managers. I think approach your job search like you're managing a long-term project. So instead of thinking it as, I need to apply, taking one direct approach that's not strategic, how would you manage that project? Well, you'd break it down into different parts. And one of the best things is during that project to build in time for you to kind of recuperate, because there's a lot of emotional drama, I guess, and strain that goes into job searching that may not necessarily be the same type of stress that you'd have if you were a project manager working for a company. But I think that taking the time to think through, this is going to be really challenging. I need to break this down into 30-minute segments or 15-minute segments so that I can process the details. I can develop a strategy, get an Excel out and strategize what it would look like to really nail a job search. Just pull out a fresh Excel and write down at the top your top 3 targets of what you want to do. So just start there and then put it away and come back to it later. Because even just writing down what you want to do can sometimes be overwhelming. If, for instance, you really love being a drilling engineer, and now you're having to think of going outside the industry. Giving yourself time to process what that's going to look like rather than just trying to dive in and be like, okay, I'm just going to put my foot to the pedal and just kind of like charge forward without thinking through what that long-term strategy might be. That's a really good place to start. And it also just helps to kind of check in with yourself and kind of figure out, okay, this is really tough. I'm getting really frustrated. If this isn't working, then how can I tighten up this strategy to make it more effective? And always go back to targeting. I guarantee that will be the number one way that someone will get a job, is if they're able to completely hone in and target that specific job description. It's a unique world we're living in now, and I know what it's teaching me personally, and from what I hear from a lot of other people, is that on top of your job search strategy, that you can't neglect networking. It has to be built into your job search strategy. So whenever I chat with people and they say, I've applied to over 100 jobs, and I ask them, okay, well, how's your LinkedIn networking though? And they say, oh, I'm not a social media person. I immediately know that I have to give them a little truth, because it just doesn't work that way, especially now, whenever there are so many different candidates out there applying for the job you want. You just have to take that extra step, go outside of your comfort zone, and make sure that you are covering every single base to get those jobs. Whether that means reaching out to finding a recruiter at that company and trying to connect with someone. People are going to run into a lot of roadblocks now. Recruiters won't get back to you. Hiring managers won't answer back. You have to be persistent. You have to keep pushing. If I'm being honest, a lot of the people that I talk to, and even a lot of my clients who I've worked with, some of them have told me, they've been like, I called that hiring manager every day. And my initial thought is like, oh man, they probably hate you. And they were like, yeah, no, they did. They didn't answer back. They didn't respond back. But I just kept calling. And eventually they picked up. And I already had my pitch set. I already knew what I was going to say. So they already had a strategy in place. And they showed their persistence. They were the squeaky wheel. And they got it done. They showed that they were really determined for that specific job and that they were the perfect fit. Honestly, that's gold. That's a skill sometimes that people have to kind of teach themselves in terms of going outside of their comfort zone, to be willing to reach out and talk to people, do informational interviews. If they're really passionate about 2 or 3 jobs, you dive in and you do as much research as possible about that company, about the job, about the people hiring for it, any recruiters. Like, you just do tons of research. That usually, honestly, when I talk to people and they've implemented that kind of strategy, it helps them feel so much more focused. So they don't feel so disorganized. They don't feel so out of control. At that point, they know they've covered all their bases. If it still doesn't pan out, they knew they did their best.
You spend a lot of time as an instructor, teacher, and a lot of times with people in universities.
Right.
So people in their early careers now, either just getting out of the school programs, whether that's master's or undergraduate, or they're in the first few years of their careers, they are in a very unique kind of situation now. And a lot of them are facing a lot of the issues that we already discussed, but they don't have that bank of experience to kind of pick and choose from.
Right.
So I don't know how much interaction you've had with this specific group, but if you have any advice that you can share about this, because I think it's a challenging scenario, especially for this group, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners fall within the category as well.
That's actually where I started my career outside of academia, was in being a senior manager and a director of international education at a nonprofit here in Houston. So I was building career programs, basically doing a lot of career consulting for early grads. And one of the main things that I told them whenever they were struggling to find positions was doing that same type of hustle, that exact same type of hustle. Reaching out to people just to learn, not reaching out for a job, reaching out to learn, doing tons of research on companies they were interested in, trying to be smart, figuring out market shifts and moves, see where they could adapt and shift. That's honestly what's so unique about students and early graduates, is that they are in a position where they can adapt much faster than someone who already has a 20 plus year career as like a completions consultant. I mean, I'm more worried about that person than I am about an early grad, because they can kind of reshape themselves. All it takes is figuring out, again, that strategic direction, figuring out, okay, this isn't working. I'm going into an industry that may or may not be there in 10 years. Do I want to stay in it? Am I really passionate about it? I've just gotten this petroleum engineering degree. What does that mean for me now? And I talk with a lot of students who say, no, I want to be in oil and gas. And I say, awesome. You need to be strategic. You have to think through what it's going to look like to be a petroleum engineer in 5 years. What is that going to mean? What type of strategic moves are you going to need to take? And how can you position yourself for longevity? Usually what I suggest is hustling to the point where you can even just get free work, especially I think in oil and gas, it gets really tough because most internships are paid, as they should be. But in something like a downturn, one of the most important things that early grads can do is just have work experience on their resume. And if that means hustling it out and volunteering to work for free for a small company, services, operator, doesn't matter, doing something in your target. If you want to be a reservoir engineer, you're really passionate about that, really look up companies, find companies that may be on the smaller side that may need free help. Reach out to them, be very proactive about that. And LinkedIn is the number one place that early grads should be spending a lot of time on. If there's one piece of advice in terms of social media engagement that I'll say, it's to double your time on LinkedIn. Double it. Whatever you're doing now, double it, because that is as good as being in a room with people at a networking event and taking advantage of chatting people up and having them learn you, like learn what you do, what you're passionate about. At the same time, approach LinkedIn as a handshake. So rather than reaching out to people and saying, hi, I'm trying to find a job. I see that you do this. Could you help me? Never, ever, 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 ever do that. People are people. People want to help other people if someone is very genuine, if someone is personable, and whenever they approach someone else, they first ask about the other person. So just like at a networking event, you wouldn't just go up to someone, shake their hand and say, hey, I'm looking for a job and I see on your name badge that you're a reservoir engineer. Do you have anything? Or could I work for you? You have to have conversations with people and take the time. You really, really have to take the time. A lot of this takes time. And I think that's probably what's most frustrating for people now, is to realize that they're having to sometimes start from scratch because they haven't already been doing the networking. They've been so busy working that they haven't really taken the time to connect with people and build that network. So for early grads, it's tough, but they're in a really good spot because most people want to help early grads too. I mean, if somebody reaches out and says, hey, I'm a brand new graduate, super passionate about reservoir engineering. I see that you've been a reservoir engineer for 10 years at Oxy or Noble or whatever company, and I'd really love to know what you did in a day or what you do in a day. Would you have 5 minutes to chat with me next week at X time and X day? Most of the time, people will respond to that. If you're direct, but you're personable, people will respond and be like, either they'll say, well, I guess one of 3 ways. One is they won't respond. But the other 2 ways are, sure, happy to hop on a call with you, send me an invite. The other option is, sorry, I'm not actually available to chat that day. And if that's where they end, then you follow up and you say, hey, totally understand. Would Wednesday at 3 p.m. work for you? So being persistent and being consistent with networking with people is going to be a skill that early grads are going to have to cultivate and really, really build and push past those discomfort zones that they might have. I think definitely now keep hustling. And I mean that word, hustle. Like, keep hustling. I'll say things like stay strong or whatever. And of course, that's important too. Staying emotionally strong now is super important. But the hustle is what's going to set you apart. You can have amazing materials. You can have everything lined up. You can be applying for positions. But if you're not taking that extra step, if you're not giving above, always pushing yourself to keep going above what you think you should be doing, you're not going to set yourself apart enough. And that's just the reality of this specific job market. I think that making sure that there are some best practices in mind, thinking through not only job search, but also just the materials themselves. Be doing lots of research on what a resume should look like for now. Maybe you wrote your resume 5 years ago. It may not be up to par now. So doing a lot of research, making sure that you're putting some best practices, putting your best foot forward. I do my best on LinkedIn, which is where people can find me. On LinkedIn, Amanda Rico, PhD. I do my best to give really practical advice on resumes and job searching, and specifically tailored for oil, gas, and energy professionals. Just because I see so much fluff advice all the time. I'll see posts come out that are just like, be on the lookout for jobs, stay strong. It's patronizing. I'm like, give me something real. Give me a strategy. Tell me what file format I should be uploading in. Which, by the way, always upload in doc. Avoid PDF unless you absolutely have to. But if you're uploading a resume to an online application, upload in a doc or a docx. And the reason for that is because there are applicant tracking systems that are trying to process your content. And if you're uploading a fixed document, something like a PDF, a lot of the older tracking systems will not be able to process that very well. And so if you've ever had it happen where you've sent in your job application and all of your details auto-populate wrong, it's probably a good sign you need to change your format. So I think staying relevant, keeping up the hustle, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, that's how you're going to set yourself apart. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active.
Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope you learned just as much as I did from Dr. Rico about building your career. It's truly a pleasure to be back here, and we're looking forward to another episode next week. So I hope to see you there. Don't forget to share this with a friend or colleague. This is one of those episodes that I think it's going to be very good to share. So if you fall into the category where you are still looking for your first job in the sector, or you've been working for a while and you want to transition your career, I'm sure you have other friends who are in the same bucket, people who graduated along the same time. So yeah, just share it with somebody. Trust me, they will thank you for it. And I hope to see you all next week. And as usual, have a lovely day. Bye bye now.